Our topic for today is about research ethics. Okay, so chapter 4 of our discussion. Okay. So, of course, it is very important to a researcher, no, to consider the ethical behavior in doing your research. Here are the objectives, no. Upon the completion of the chapter, the students demonstrate understanding of organization and ethics committees, intellectual ownership in plagiarism, responsibility and accountability of the researcher, and carrying out the research. At early stage, we need to know automatically the intellectual ownership in plagiarism, no, as a researcher. Now, a research, however novel its discoveries, is only of any value if it is carried out honestly. So, we cannot trust the result of a research project if we suspect that the researchers have not acted with integrity. Although, it might be easy enough to take shortcuts or even to cheat, it really is not worth it. Not only will your research be discredited when you are found out, but you will suffer severe penalties and humiliation. It is simple matter to follow the clear guidelines in citation that will prevent you being accused of passing off others people's work as your own, called plagiarism. In fact, to refer to to or quote other people's work is seen as a virtue and demonstrate that you have read widely about your subject and are knowledgeable about the most important people and their ideas. Working with human participants in your research always raises ethical issues about how you treat them. People should be treated with respect, of course, which has many implications for how you deal with them before, during, and after the research. Educational and professional organizations who oversee research projects have strict ethical guidelines that must be followed. However, the issues can become quite complicated with no clear-cut solutions. It is therefore important that you consult with others, especially advisors appointed for that purpose. Even if you are not using human participants in your research, there is still the question of honesty, no? In the way you collect, analyze, and interpret data. By explaining exactly how you arrive at your conclusion, and you can avoid accusations of cover-ups or false reasoning. Actually, we have what we call two aspect, no, to uh, aspects of ethical issues in research, no? The individual values, of course, uh, of the researchers relating to honesty and frankness and personal integrity. Number two will be the researcher's treatment of other people involved in the research relating to informed consent, confidentiality, anonymity, and courtesy, which at present we are now implementing the data privacy, no? So therefore, we need to be, of course, consider the consent, no? The confidentiality again, and the anonymity and courtesy. Although the principle underpinning ethical practice are fairly straightforward and easy to understand, their application can be quite difficult in certain situations, and not all decisions can be clear-cut in the realm of human relations. As what we have here, organizations and ethics committees. Na? All organizations that are involved in research involving human participants have set up a code of practice for their researchers. To see typical example of these types of guidelines, you can visit different educational research department, no, for some ethical practice in a statement, no. The university will have their own code of practice, of course, and the role of ethics committees is to oversee the research carried out in their organizations in relation to ethical issues. Is it they who formulate the research ethics code of conduct and monitor its applications in the research carried out by members of their organizations, and applying for ethics approval inevitably involves filing in the forms. Honesty in your work. Honesty is essential for research, okay? Not only to enable straightforward, above-board communication, but engender a level of trust and credibility in the outcomes of the research. This implies to all researchers, no matter what subject they are investigating. Although honesty must be maintained in all aspects of other research work, it is worth focusing here on several of the most important issues. Intellectual ownership and plagiarism. No, unless otherwise stated, what you write will be regarded as your own work. The ideas will be considered your own unless you say to the contrary. The worst offense against honesty in this respect is called plagiarism. Directly copying someone else's work into your report, thesis, and others, and letting it be assumed that it is your own. Using the thoughts, ideas, and work of others without acknowledging their source, even if you paraphrase into your own words, is unethical. Equally serious is claiming sole authorship of work which is in fact the result of collaboration or amanuensis or ghosting. Acknowledgement and citation. Obviously, in no field of research can you rely entirely on your own ideas, concepts, and theories. You can avoid accusation of plagiarism by acknowledging the resources or the sources of these features and their originators within your own text. This is called citation. Now, although there are several well-established citation methods, they all consist of brief annotation or numbers placed within the text and identify the cited material, and a list of references at the end of the text that give the full publication details of the source material. And these methods or reference cater for direct quotations or ideas in others from the work of others gathered from a wide variety of sources such as books, journals, conferences, talks, no? And of course interviews, TV programs, and others, and should be meticulously used. You should also indicate the assistance of others and any collaboration with others, and usually in the form of a written acknowledgement at the beginning or end of the report or your capstone project. Responsibility, responsibility and accountability of the researcher. Apart from correct attribution, honesty is essential in the substance of what you write. You do have responsibility to fellow researchers, respondents, the public, and the academic community. Accurate description are required of what you have done, how you have done it, the information you obtained, the techniques you used, the analysis you carried out, and the results of experiments. A myriad of details concerning every part of your work. We have data and interpretation. Although it is difficult, and some maintain that it is impossible to be free from bias, distorting your data or results knowingly is a serious lapse of honesty. Because scientific objectivity should be maintained as much as possible, if you can see any reason for a possibility of bias in any aspect of the research, it should be acknowledged and explained. If the study involves personal judgment and assessments, the basis for this should be given, and silently rejecting or ignoring evidence which happens to be contrary to one's beliefs or being too selective in the data used and in presenting the results of the analysis constitute a breach of integrity. The sources of financial support for the research activity should be mentioned, and pressure and sponsorship from sources which might influence the impartiality of the research outcome should be avoided. So where do you stand? The theoretical perspectives, no, or epistemology of the researcher should be made clear at the outset of the research so that the ground rules or assumption that underpin the research can be understood by the readers, and in some instances, the subjects of the research. One of the principal functions of doing background research is to explore just this aspect and to come to decisions on theory that will form the basis of your research approach. The theoretical approach will influence the type of data collection and analysis used, and these methods are not ethically neutral, so they will raise ethical issues. Situations that raise ethical issues. The social research and other forms of research which study people and their relationship to each other and to the world need to be particularly sensitive about issues of ethical behavior. As this kind of research often impinges on the sensibilities and rights of other people, researchers must be aware of necessary ethical standards which should be observed to avoid any harm which might be caused by carrying out or publishing the results of the research study or project. The research aims, okay? Although research aim merely at gaining greater knowledge and understanding of a phenomenon, has little or no ethical consequences. The expansion of scientific knowledge is generally regarded as a good thing. Applied research is more easily subjective to ethical investigation. Will the result of the research benefit society or at least not harm it? Will there be losers as well as gainers? The research aims and their consequences must be clearly stated. And normally, you will have to argue that the aims of your research are in accordance with the ethical standards prescribed by your college or university or your organizations. The use of language is also important, no? How you use language has an important influence when doing and writing up research. You should aim be as neutral as possible in the way you use terminology involving people, whom and what they are and what they do. Yes. Guard against being patronizing or disparaging and avoid bias, stereotyping, discrimination, prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination. You will notice that acceptable terminology changes with time, so be aware that terms used in some older literature are not suitable for use now. You need to be constantly aware of the real meaning of terms and their use within the particular context. We have presentation. This relates to how you present yourself in the role of the researcher, which might influence the attitude and expectation of the people you involve in your research or your project. Student researchers should present themselves as just that and give the correct impression that they are doing the research as an academic exercise which does not have the institutional or political backing to cause immediate action. Practitioner researchers such as teachers, nurses, or social workers have a professional status that lends more authority and possibly power to investigate change. Do not raise false expectations. The research situation can also be influential. Stopping people in the street and asking a few standardized questions will not raise any expectations about actions. But if you spend a lot of time with it, or with a perhaps lonely old person's delving into her personality story, the more simple research context. Even more expectation can raise if you are working in a context of deprivation or inequality. Will the subjects begin to expect you to do something to improve their situation? How to deal with participants? You should treat participants with due ethical considerations. No? In the way you choose them, deal with them personally, and how you use the information they provide. In many cases, participants choose freely whether to take part in a survey by simply responding to the form or not. However, friends or relatives may feel that they have an obligation to help you despite reservation they may have and could result in a restriction of their freedom to refuse. Pressure might be extended on participants if they are left too little time for due considerations, which might also result in them regretting taking part. And obviously, you should avoid dishonest means of persuasion, such as posing as an official, making unrealistic and untrue promises, being unduly persistent, and targeting people in vulnerable situations. And this could occur almost inadvertently if you are not alert to people's situation and reactions. The participants of your study will decide whether to take part according to the information they receive about the research. The form that this information takes will depend on the type of person, the nature of the research process, and the context. It should be clear and easily understood so they can make a fair assessment of the project in order to give an informed consent. Particular attention is needed when getting consent from vulnerable people such as children, the elderly or ill, foreign language speakers, and those who are illiterate. Excuse. When working within organizations, managers or other people with overall responsibility may need to be consulted, with the result that several layers of consent will be required. Make it clear and get agreement at all levels about what issues are to be discussed, how the investigation will be conducted, how confidentiality will be maintained, and be aware that there may be conflicts of interest between the management and employees, so there must be some obvious form of protection for those making criticism of the organization or systems of work or conditions. Although verbal explanation may be sufficient in informal situation, and a written resume on a flyer could be useful. Questionnaires should always provide the necessary written information as an introduction. The participants must have the right to terminate their participation at any time. Okay, now, carrying out the research. Potential harm in gain. The principle behind the ethical research is to cause no harm, and, if possible, to produce some gain for the participants in the project and the wider field. Therefore, the researchers should assess the potential of the chosen research methods and their outcomes for causing harm or gain. And this involves recognizing what the risk might be and choosing methods that minimize this risk and avoiding making an revelations that could in any way be harmful to the reputation, dignity, or privacy of the subjects. How to record the data? There is a danger of simplifying transcript when writing up data from interviews and open questions. When you clean up and organize the data, you can start to impose your own interpretation, ignoring vocal inflections, repetitions, asides, and subtleties of humor, and therefore losing some of the meanings. Further distortion can be introduced by being governed by one's own particular assumptions. Who is the participant? How about the participant's involvement? Questions about rapport are raised if your research entails close communication between you and researcher and the participants. Will those involved understand the motivation for your action, and do this conform to your own practice? You should not take familiarity so far as to deceive in order to extract information that the participant might later regret giving. Neither should you raise unrealistic expectation in order to ingratiate yourself. Sensitive materials, okay? Information can be thrown up and that is of a sensitive nature which, if revealed, could do damage to the participants or to other people. Every case will have to be judged individually, but if this information is relevant to the research, it must be presented in such a way that individuals are not damaged by assuring confidentiality and anonymity. In cases of, for example, unfairness, victimization, or bullying, it is unwise to get personal involved, but it may be possible to give advice to the participants about who to contact for help, such as a school tutor, trade union, or ombudsman, and others. Honesty, deception, and covert methods. Again, honesty is a basic tenet of ethical sound research, so any type of deception and use of covert methods should be ruled out. Although, you might argue that certain information of benefits to society can only be gained by these methods due to obstruction by people or organizations that are not willing to risk being scrutinized. How can you be sure of the benign consequences of these actions? The risk involved make the use of deception and covert methods extremely questionable and in some cases even dangerous. Storing and transmitting data. The Data Protection Act and equivalent regulations elsewhere cover the conditions regarding collection of personal data in whatever form and at whatever scale. They spell out the rights of the subjects and responsibility of the compilers and holders of the data. The data that you have collected may will contain confidential detail from PIC, no, about people and or organization or the PIP. It is therefore important to devise a storage system that is safe and only accessible to you. If you need to transmit data, take measures that the method of transmission is secure and not open to unauthorized access. Checking data in drafts. It is appropriate to pass the drafts of your research report on to colleagues or supervisors for comment, but only with the proviso that the content is kept confidential, particularly as it is not ready for publication and dissemination at this stage. The intellectual independence of the findings of the report could be undermined if you allow sponsor to make comments on a draft and they demand changes to be made to conclusions that are contrary to their interest. It is not practical to let respondents or participants read and edit large amounts of a primary data. Dissemination. Dissemination of your results in the form of conference or journal papers, a website or other types of publication inevitably involves reducing the length of the materials and perhaps changing the style of the writing. You must therefore be careful that the publication remains true to the original and avoid simplification, bias towards particular results, or even sensationalization. How about disposing of records? A suitable time and method should be decided for disposing of the records at the end of the research project. Ideally, the matter will have been agreed with the participants as a part of their informed consent, so the decision will have been made much earlier. The basic policy is to ensure that all the data is anonymous and non-attributable. This can be done by removing all labels and titles that could lead to identification. Better still, data should be disposed on of which or such of in which in a such a way as to be completely indecipherable. This might entail shredding documents, formatting disk, and erasing our tapes. Where to find out more? Although, ethical behavior should underlie all academic work. It is in the social sciences, as well as the medicine, of course, that the really difficult issues arises. Okay, researching people and society raises many ethical questions that are discussed na a while ago. The first set of discussion aimed generally at the student and professional researchers. And of course, we cite some examples a while ago. Though the issues remain much the same for whoever is doing research involving human participants. So I hope that you may consider some ethical considerations, no? Uh, Also, compliance with Data Privacy Act and some other agencies, no? In doing your capstone, research, or thesis project. And that's it for chapter 4 for research ethics. See you on our next discussion. God bless everyone.